To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear, to defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism.
This is simply amazing. And far from scaring people into shutting up about 9/11 and 7/7 being inside jobs, because of this, we need another push even harder, even deeper, to reach even more people, to get the truth about these events out there. Cameron must think people are completely and utterly stupid if he thinks he can lump violent extremists with so-called non-violent extremists. In this speech, he may lead you to believe that he's talking about non-violent Muslim extremists, but have no doubt, he means everybody who doesn't believe what he says. This is supposed to frighten us into you're either with us or you're with the violent extremists. Sooner or later, he'll start talking about homegrown extremists, who basically is anyone that questions the government. They will be seen as aiding terrorists. Not only Muslims, everyone. So according to Cameron, telling people that there's something wrong with a 47-storey building falling at free fall speed into its own footprint because of a small fire, or that someone hired by the government was running a drill that envisaged the same bombs going off at the same place at the exact same time as what actually occurred on 7/7.
Today we were running an exercise for a company, bearing in mind I'm now in the private sector, and we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team, and the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the Underground and mainline station. So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real. And one of the first things is, get that bureau number. When you have a list of people missing, tell them. And so it took a long time.
Just to get this right, you were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario?
Almost precisely.
According to Cameron, that makes you as dangerous as somebody who takes a hostage and beheads him. Cameron is being intellectually dishonest about this, and he knows it. It is utterly ridiculous and just shows how desperate they are becoming and how desperate they are to complete their fascist dictatorship before too many people wake up to their fraud and their game is over and we arrest these fuckers and hang them at The Hague. Cameron doesn't go so far to actually come out and say it, but in his speech, Cameron is implying that people who disagree with the government are as bad as people who kill Christians and behead people. Meaning that if you can think for yourself, then you're a danger to the government and you simply must be removed. Haven't we been here before? Stalin? Hitler? Anyone? What Cameron says is very dangerous to our so-called democracy. Being allowed to say these things, and what they imply, in the UN, of all places, also tells us that the United Nations bureaucracy agrees with what Cameron is saying. We're heading for troubled waters when a leader of a major country is saying that people who question a government's narrative are deemed extremists. Cameron went up massively in my danger scale. He must be removed next year. He has to be removed at the general election. Was it the non-violent extremists that started the Iraq War in 2003 that killed over 1 million innocent people that led to the ISIS crisis we have now? Was it the non-violent extremists who helped kill 60,000 innocent people in Libya in 2011 and cause Al-Qaeda to take over the country who then went on to kill tens of thousands of Christians? No, it was Cameron. Was it the non-violent extremists who blamed Russia without a fucking shred of evidence for the downing of Flight MH17, which could have led to World War III? No, it was Cameron. Was it the non-violent extremists who were involved in black market nuclear weapon deals in the early 90s, and God only knows where those weapons are now? No, it was Cameron. Was it the non-violent extremists who introduced the bedroom tax and resulting in countless people killing themselves as a direct result? No, it was David fucking Cameron. David Cameron is so much more of a threat to our way of life than any non-violent extremists. Perhaps if David Cameron and governments of the West could be bothered to answer sensibly people's questions and queries and not shroud everything in secrecy, such as David Kelly's autopsy. Nothing to see here because there's nothing to see here. We're going to keep his autopsy classified for 70 years because obviously there's nothing to see here. Move along. Then maybe there wouldn't be so many people questioning government, would there? There are a couple of times when the US government have tried to answer questions about 9/11. One was the Commission report and one was about Building 7's collapse. With the Commission report, it transpired that 7 out of 10 of the commissioners didn't believe the Commission report that they themselves wrote. So, if 70% of the people who wrote the Commission didn't believe it, why the fuck should I? It's not a 9/11 the Jews did it conspiracy. The whole thing just doesn't add up. And if people in the government are lying and trying to cover things up, good chance they're involved to save their asses. Logical? Is that non-violent extremism in action, or is it merely critical thinking? The National Institute of Standards and Technology were asked to investigate the collapse of Building 7. Having looked at the building's collapse for several years, they finally reported that the first 2 to 3 seconds of the building was brought down at free fall speed. Now, for that to happen, approximately 80 columns within that building have to collapse within 0.1 seconds of each other. This is simply impossible if fire is the cause. This is why so many people do not believe that fire was the cause of Building 7's collapse. The building can only have been brought down with explosives in the manner it collapsed. In other words, by way of controlled demolition. Also, it looks like a controlled demolition. Is that non-violent extremism in action? Or again, is it critical thinking? Is it being a non-violent extremist to question if a plane hit the Pentagon? Is it being a non-violent extremist to question if Flight 11 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania? Because I don't fucking see a plane. Is it being a non-violent extremist to question how molten fucking steel was gushing under the Twin Towers if planes crashing in the top of them caused them to collapse?
You see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava.
From a volcano.
The fires got very intense down there and actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Is it being a non-violent extremist to consider and study the numerous accounts of bombs going off in the buildings?
What happened?
We was in an explosion. We was in the lobby and then fucking the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
Planet probably?
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking plane blew.
Is it being a non-violent extremist to question if the phone calls from the planes were actually ever made because the FBI said they fucking weren't? Is it being a non-violent extremist to question Peter Power and his terror training drills on 7/7? Is it being a non-violent extremist to question where the bombs were placed on 7/7 as an eyewitness accounts them being placed under the train, pushing the metal up through the train? Will it be the non-violent extremists that will keep our borders open, allowing violent extremists entry into our country to carry out terror attacks that will allow the government to clamp down on our freedoms even more? No, it'll be David fucking Cameron that keeps our borders open. As I've said before many times, if the threat really was that bad and that dangerous, our borders would be closed that day. Don't listen to David Cameron. He is an extremist. He is a murderer. And trying to link people who question 9/11 and 7/7 with violent extremists is nothing short of disgraceful and just proves how dangerous people like him are to our way of life.